Henry Crawford had lived on the same ranch for more than 30 years. The land was wide and wild, stretching far beyond what the eye could see. With rolling hills, thick forests, and streams that glimmered under the sun, the ranch was more than just a place to live. It was his home, his responsibility, and, in many ways, his only companion. Yet despite its beauty, there was a quiet loneliness that clung to the place, one that had grown heavier over the years since the death of his wife. Each morning, Henry woke before the sun. The rooster's crow was unnecessary. He already knew it was time. He dressed in worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, the fabric soft from years of washing and wearing. His boots were scuffed and dusty, but they carried him steadily across the fields, over uneven ground and along paths only he knew. Breakfast was simple: eggs, toast, and coffee, often eaten in silence, the quiet broken only by the soft clinking of dishes. After eating, he stepped outside. The air smelled of earth and grass, carrying a faint hint of wood smoke from the small stove in the barn. He listened for the sounds of life, the lowing of cows, the rustling of trees, the occasional bird overhead. The ranch was alive, even if people were not. Henry found comfort in this, the steady rhythm of nature providing a kind of companionship that no human could. Tending the cattle was his first task of the day. He moved through the fields slowly, checking each animal, making sure no one was sick or injured. The cows recognized him. Some would nuzzle his hand, others simply watched quietly. The ranch taught patience, Henry thought. It demanded care, attention, and resilience. Each animal was dependent on him, and in that dependence, he found purpose. Yet even with work and responsibility, the silence was constant. His only human contact was the occasional visit from neighbors, who were often too busy with their own farms, and rare trips to the town several miles away. Letters arrived sometimes, mostly from family members scattered across the country. But they could not fill the emptiness he felt. He had learned to live with it, to accept it. But some days the loneliness pressed down so heavily that he could hardly breathe. Henry had not always lived alone. Long ago, he had shared this life with Margaret, his wife. They had dreamed together, built a home, and raised children who eventually left for their own lives far from the ranch. Margaret had died suddenly one spring, leaving Henry alone with the fields, the cattle, and the silence. At first, he could not imagine life without her, and for months he wandered the land in a daze, completing tasks out of habit rather than care. Over time, the pain became quieter, replaced by a steady, muted sorrow. He remembered her in small ways of folded shirt in the closet, a cup she had left on the counter, the smell of her perfume in the wind when the weather turned warm. These memories were both comfort and pain, gentle reminders of what had been lost. The ranch had changed him. He was no longer the young man who had once dreamed of adventure beyond the hills. Now he found satisfaction in small victories, fixing a broken fence, repairing the old tractor, planting crops in neat rows that would yield fruit months later. The work kept him grounded. He moved with quiet purpose, each action deliberate, each day a repetition of the one before. Some might call it boring or lonely, but Henry called it peace. Still, life on the ranch was not without challenges. Winters were harsh, the wind biting through layers of clothing, snow piling high against the barn doors. Storms could sweep through in minutes, flooding fields or knocking down trees. Henry had learned to anticipate the weather, to respect its power, and to prepare for the worst. Each season brought a rhythm, a pattern he relied upon. The cycles of nature reminded him that life, even in isolation, moved forward. Evenings were the quietest part of the day. The sun sank slowly behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Henry often sat on the porch of his small wooden house, a cup of tea in hand, listening to the distant call of an owl or the gentle rustle of leaves in the trees. Sometimes he would read letters from family, occasionally writing a few words back. Sometimes he simply stared into the distance, letting thoughts wander where they might. The darkness of night felt complete here, unbroken by streetlights or city sounds. It was a darkness he had grown accustomed to, a friend as much as a reminder of solitude. Despite this life of quiet and routine, Henry occasionally wondered if he had grown too accustomed to being alone. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when he longed for someone to share a laugh with, someone to break the monotony of endless days. But these thoughts were often pushed aside, replaced by tasks that demanded attention: mending a fence, feeding the chickens, checking the water troughs. He had learned that work could distract from loneliness, and he was an expert at keeping himself busy. Henry's neighbors were kind, though few and far between. He knew most of them by sight and by voice, exchanging greetings when they crossed paths. Occasionally a neighbor would bring supplies or ask for advice on cattle care. Henry appreciated these brief connections. They reminded him that he was not completely cut off from the world. Still, he preferred his own company. People were unpredictable, and over the years, he had learned the value of simplicity and control that only solitude could provide. One particular morning, Henry woke earlier than usual. The sky was a deep blue, the air crisp and cool, and the light of dawn spilling over the fields. He felt a restlessness that he could not explain. He checked the fences, counted the cattle, and repaired a small section of the barn roof that had been damaged in a recent storm. Everything seemed normal, yet there was a tension in the air, as if the ranch itself was holding its breath. Henry ignored it, attributing the feeling to nothing more than imagination. Life on the ranch was often like that: quiet, calm, and filled with small mysteries that went unnoticed. As the sun rose higher, Henry paused by the stream that ran through the property. Water flowed steadily, its surface sparkling with sunlight. He knelt and touched the cool water, watching ripples spread outward. This was his favorite part of the day, a moment of reflection before work began. The ranch had taught him patience, endurance, and humility. The land demanded respect, and Henry had learned to give it willingly. It was his teacher, his companion, and, in many ways, his solace. Even in solitude, life on the ranch was never entirely predictable. Animals could become sick, machinery could break, and storms could arrive without warning. Henry had grown skilled at responding to challenges, solving problems with calm and determination. His life was one of simple, honest work, shaped by the land and seasons. Yet under it all was the quiet ache of a heart that had known love and loss. He carried memories of Margaret like treasures, invisible yet ever-present. And so Henry lived. Day after day, week after week, he followed his routines with steady hands and a patient heart. The ranch was his life, his world, and his refuge. The loneliness remained, but he had learned to live with it, to find comfort in the rhythm of work, the sounds of nature, and the memories of a life once shared. Little did Henry know that the stillness of his life, the quiet isolation he had grown so accustomed to, was about to be broken in a way he could never have imagined. The next moments, days, and weeks would challenge everything he had known, forcing him to confront emotions long buried and to face a situation that would test his courage, compassion, and humanity in ways he had never experienced. The day had started like any other for Henry. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting golden streaks across the fields. The cows were lowing softly, the stream sparkled in the light, and the air smelled of damp earth and fresh grass. Yet, deep in the quiet of his solitude, Henry felt a small unease he could not explain. It was subtle, a pull at the edges of his mind, as though the ranch itself were trying to tell him something. He shook the thought away and continued his work, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Henry had been walking along the far side of the property, checking fences near the old barn. That part of the land was more isolated, overgrown with shrubs and trees, and seldom visited. He liked the peace there, the way the world seemed to shrink to just him, the cows, and the wind whispering through the leaves. Suddenly, he heard a faint, strange sound that did not belong to any animal on the ranch. It was almost a whisper, but there was urgency in it, a quiet call for help. At first, Henry froze. His mind tried to rationalize the sound. Perhaps it was a stray animal stuck in the branches or mud. Perhaps it was the wind playing tricks. But the sound came again, sharper this time, unmistakably human. Something or someone was in trouble. Henry's heart quickened. He moved cautiously toward the noise, stepping over fallen branches and rocks. Each step brought him closer to the source, and with every step, the voice grew louder, more desperate. It was difficult to tell exactly where it came from. The tall grass and thick trees created shadows and false shapes, making him second-guess himself. Still, he pressed on, driven by instinct and a sudden surge of concern. Finally, he reached a small clearing near the edge of the barn. There, hanging from a low tree branch, was a young girl. She was small and fragile, barely more than a teenager. Her body swayed slightly, and her face was pale. Henry's chest tightened, and for a moment he could not breathe. The sight was shocking, terrifying, and yet he knew he had to act quickly. Without thinking twice, Henry ran to her side. His hands were steady, despite the fear gripping his chest. He carefully untangled her from the rope, lifting her gently into his arms. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow. Panic threatened to take over, but Henry forced himself to remain calm. He laid her down on a soft patch of grass, checking for any visible injuries. Her pulse was faint but there, a fragile sign of life. Henry's mind raced. He had never faced anything like this before. The ranch had its challenges: storms, injured animals, broken fences, but nothing compared to the delicate weight of a human life resting in his arms. He whispered softly to her, telling her that she was safe, that he was there, that help would come. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the fear he tried to hide. Minutes passed, and he worked methodically. He checked her clothing, looking for signs of harm, and gently wiped dirt from her face. The world around him seemed to fade. The cows in the distance, the rustling leaves, even the whine-doll of it became background noise to the one urgent truth. He had to keep her alive until help arrived. Then, slowly, a small cough escaped her lips. Henry's heart leaped. It was weak at first, barely audible, but it was a sign. She was breathing. He continued to speak to her in a calm, soothing tone, encouraging her, guiding her back from the edge of unconsciousness. Each tiny movement she made, an eyelid flicker, a shiver, was a victory, a reminder of the fragility and resilience of life. Henry realized he needed warmth. He wrapped her in a blanket he always kept in the barn for emergencies. The sun was dipping lower, and the air was growing cold. His own jacket went over her as well. He adjusted her position gently, ensuring she could breathe freely. Even in his worry, he acted with care, mindful of every movement, every touch. As he waited, Henry's mind wandered briefly, reflecting on the girl's life before this moment. Who was she? Why had she ended up here, in the middle of nowhere, in need of rescue? Questions tumbled through his thoughts, but there was no time to answer them now. The most important thing was her survival. Soon, Henry grabbed his old radio and called for help, giving directions to his remote location. The signal was weak and he had to repeat himself several times, but eventually the message got through. He was told that help was on the way, but it would take some time to reach him. That meant he had to stay vigilant, to hold her, to keep her breathing steady until someone arrived. While he waited, Henry talked to her. His words were simple, but he hoped they offered comfort. He told her about the ranch, the quiet animals, the way the sun moved over the fields. He asked her to hang on, to take slow breaths, to stay with him. His own voice seemed to grow stronger with each passing minute, bolstered by determination and a surge of compassion he had not felt in years. Eventually, the girl's eyes fluttered open. They were wide and scared, but there was life in them. Henry smiled, a small, relieved smile, and kept speaking to her softly. She gasped for air, coughing, but gradually began to sit up slightly. Henry supported her carefully, never letting her slip or fall. The connection between them was silent but powerful. An unspoken bond formed in the face of danger and fear. Henry felt emotions he had long buried. Loneliness, grief, and routine had shaped his life for decades. But now something new emerged: responsibility, care, and the sudden fierce need to protect. He realized how much he had missed having someone to care for, someone to save, even if just for a moment. The experience stirred a warmth in his heart he thought he had lost forever. Soon, the sound of approaching vehicles reached Henry's ears. The distant roar of an engine grew louder, and within minutes, a team of helpers arrived. They moved quickly, assessing the girl, checking her pulse and helping her to safety. Henry stepped back, watching as professionals took over, but his gaze never left her. She had survived thanks to his quick actions, but he also knew this moment had changed him. The routine, quiet life of the ranch could never be the same. As the girl was taken away to receive care, she looked back at Henry, her eyes meeting his. There was a silent gratitude there, a bond formed in shared vulnerability, fear, and relief. Henry nodded, a small smile on his face. He had saved a life today, and in doing so, had rediscovered a part of himself he had thought lost. After the emergency team left, Henry returned to the barn, exhausted but filled with a strange energy. He moved slowly, completing his tasks mechanically, but his mind was alive with thought. The ranch felt different, somehow less empty, less silent. He had faced something extraordinary, and it had awakened a part of him that routine and solitude had buried. That night, as he sat on the porch watching the stars, Henry thought about the girl. Who was she? What challenges had brought her to this place? And how could he, a man so long accustomed to living alone, find a way to continue this unexpected connection? Questions lingered, but there was no fear, only hope, curiosity, and a quiet determination. For the first time in years, Henry felt a stirring of life beyond the ranch. He realized that, while isolation had been his companion, it had not been his only path. The world was larger, filled with people, stories, and chances to make a difference. And even in the quiet, remote corners of his land, he had found a moment of extraordinary humanity, one that would stay with him forever. Henry went to bed that night with a tired body but a heart strangely awake. He could not sleep entirely. Images of the girl's pale face, her sudden cough, and the relief in her eyes replayed in his mind. He felt gratitude not just for her survival, but for the reminder that life could change in an instant. Solitude was no longer a cage. It was a backdrop for acts of courage, care, and unexpected connection as he drifted into sleep. Henry knew that tomorrow would be different. He would tend his cattle, repair fences, and walk the fields as he always had, but he would also carry a new awareness. Life could be fragile, moments precious, and courage found in the simplest of actions. And perhaps somewhere on the horizon, this girl's story would intersect with his life again, creating a bond that neither time nor distance could erase. The ranch remained quiet that night, the stars bright above the fields, the wind soft in the trees. But inside Henry, a quiet revolution had begun, a change sparked by a single, extraordinary moment, one that would shape not only his days, but the very heart of his life. The days after the rescue passed in a blur for Henry Crawford. The ranch, usually his world of calm routine, now seemed to hum with a quiet tension. The image of the girl's pale face, her shallow breathing, and the fragile gasp of life he had held in his hands replayed in his mind at odd times. Even simple tasks, feeding the cattle, checking the fences, repairing the barn, were shadowed by the memory of that day. Henry had always known that the ranch demanded patience, care, and responsibility. But now, it demanded something more: reflection. He spent long hours sitting on the porch in the early morning, staring at the mist rising from the fields, thinking about the girl's story. Who was she? Where had she come from? And how would life unfold for her after this day? He knew that she had been taken to the town's clinic and would receive care from social services. But Henry also realized that the event had changed him in ways that could not be undone. The rescue had awakened feelings he had thought were long-buried: compassion, courage. In a renewed connection to the world beyond his fields, Henry returned to the barn one morning, moving carefully as he carried hay to the cows. His hands were strong from years of work, but there was a new gentleness in his movements. He found himself thinking of the girl often. Her name, he learned later, was Emily, a young girl from a nearby town who had been facing hardships that Henry could hardly imagine. Though they had not yet met again, he felt an invisible thread connecting them. Woven through a moment of shared vulnerability and trust, neighbors began to notice a change in Henry. Those who had known him as a solitary, quiet man observed that he seemed more alert, more alive. He smiled more readily, spoke more often when passing in the fields. and moved with a sense of purpose that went beyond routine work. There was a subtle lightness in his step, a quiet warmth in his presence that had been absent for years. One afternoon, a social worker arrived at the ranch with news. Emily was recovering well. She had asked to see Henry, the man who had saved her life. At first, Henry felt hesitant. He had lived alone for decades, accustomed to the rhythms of isolation. Yet the thought of seeing her again stirred something he could not ignore, a mixture of curiosity, concern, and the faintest hope for a connection that had been missing in his life. The meeting was arranged carefully. Henry watched from the porch as a small car approached the barn. Emily stepped out, shy but composed. Her eyes met his, and in that moment the bond forged on the day of the rescue seemed to reappear, unbroken by time or distance. She walked slowly toward him, and he extended a hand to help her over the uneven ground. Words were not necessary at first. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding and unspoken gratitude. Over the next few weeks, Henry became a quiet presence in Emily's recovery. He shared stories of life on the ranch, the animals, the streams, the changing seasons, and listened as she spoke of her dreams, her fears, and the challenges she had faced. Their conversations were gentle, full of pauses, laughter, and moments of reflection. For Henry, it was a revelation to experience such closeness again, a reminder that even in later years, life could offer new beginnings and meaningful connections. The ranch itself seemed to reflect this change. The fields, once only a backdrop to solitary work, now became a place of learning, exploration, and shared experience. Henry taught Emily how to care for the animals, how to mend fences, and how to move with patience through the natural world. Emily responded eagerly, absorbing lessons with curiosity and a quiet determination that reminded Henry of the resilience of youth. Henry realized that this experience had taught him more than just the value of action in a moment of crisis. It had shown him the importance of human connection, of trust, and of extending care beyond oneself. His life, once defined by isolation and routine, was now enriched by responsibility, empathy, and the joy of nurturing someone who needed guidance. Evenings on the ranch took on a new meaning, instead of the quiet solitude that had once been his companion. Henry now shared stories with Emily, listened to her questions, and watched as she learned to appreciate the beauty of the land. The stars above seemed brighter, the wind gentler, and the quiet more comforting than ever before. For both of them, the ranch had become a place of healing, growth, and hope. Henry's neighbors also noticed the change in him. He began attending small community gatherings, offering advice to young farmers, and volunteering to help with local events. The quiet man who had once shied away from contact was now engaged, not for attention or recognition, but because he understood the importance of community, of shared responsibility, and of offering kindness without expectation. Emily, for her part, flourished under Henry's quiet guidance. She began to regain confidence, participating in school, forming friendships, and slowly rebuilding the life that had been disrupted. Her bond with Henry remained strong, a source of comfort and stability. They spent hours together exploring the fields, tending animals, and simply sitting by the stream, watching the water move steadily and reflecting on life's journey. Through it all, Henry learned to face his own past. He thought often of Margaret, his late wife, and of the years he had spent in solitude. He realized that while grief and loss were part of life, they did not define it entirely. There was space for new beginnings, for acts of care, and for connections that could heal even the deepest wounds. Emily's presence reminded him that life could surprise, that courage and compassion were timeless, and that even the most quiet and ordinary lives could become extraordinary. When touched by human kindness, seasons changed on the ranch. Spring brought new growth. Summer filled the fields with warmth. Autumn painted the hills with gold and red, and winter covered the land in soft blankets of snow. Henry and Emily moved through these seasons together, learning from each day, celebrating small victories, and finding joy in shared moments. Life, once measured in solitude and routine, was now measured in laughter, learning, and the gentle bond between two people who had come together through circumstance and care. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Henry stood by the fence, watching Emily gather water for the animals. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment that he had not known in decades. The ranch, the land, the animals, they were all familiar, unchanged in many ways. Yet everything had changed. His heart, once heavy with solitude, now carried warmth, hope, a renewed sense of purpose. Henry realized that life's most profound moments often arrived unexpectedly. A single day, a single act of courage could reshape years of isolation, grief, and routine. Emily's survival had not only saved her life, but had awakened something in him. A reminder that even the loneliest hearts could find connection, care, and meaning. As night fell, Henry sat on the porch. Looking at the stars reflected in the stream below, Emily had gone inside to rest, her presence still filling the air with quiet energy. Henry felt peace, but also anticipation. The future was no longer a series of solitary days, but a journey filled with possibility, growth, and shared experiences. He understood that life's true beauty lay not just in the land he cared for, but in the people he chose to care for and the bonds he nurtured along the way. In the following months, Henry and Emily continued to grow together. He taught her everything he knew about ranch life, the care of the animals, the changing patterns of weather, the importance of patience and observation. In return, Emily brought laughter, curiosity, and a fresh perspective to the ranch. Together, they created a rhythm that balanced work, learning, and quiet reflection, forming a partnership built on trust, respect, and care. Henry also found time to reflect on his own life. He wrote letters to distant family members, sharing stories of the ranch, the seasons, and the extraordinary events of recent weeks. He began to understand that while solitude had shaped him, connection had transformed him. Life, he realized, was not meant to be lived in isolation, no matter how comfortable the routine. The heart needed care, attention, shared experience just as much as the land needed tending and patience. The ranch, once a backdrop for years of quiet work, had become a place of hope and healing. Henry looked at the hills, the trees, and the flowing streams with new eyes. He saw life in its many forms, not just the animals or the land, but in the fragile human connections that could blossom in the most unexpected of moments. Emily's laughter, her questions, her growing confidence, they were all proof that life could surprise, and that courage, care, and compassion could transform even the quietest of worlds. In the end, Henry understood that the events of that day, the discovery, the rescue, the fragile gasp of life, were not just moments of crisis, but opportunities for growth, love, and renewal. The ranch had taught him many lessons over the years, but none as profound as this, that human life, connection and kindness are precious, fragile, and infinitely rewarding. Henry Crawford, the solitary rancher who had lived for decades in quiet isolation, had discovered something extraordinary. In saving a life, he had found the courage to embrace his own. In helping a young girl recover, he had rediscovered the beauty of care, connection, and hope. And in the quiet moments of reflection, stars twinkled above, and the wind whispered through the fields, he knew that life's most meaningful gifts often arrive when